Welcome back to Jay's Smokehouse and the History of Cannabis Series Extended, Episode 6. Cannabis in Antiquity Part 2 in Ancient Asia. This episode will be focusing on ancient China with the Han Dynasty and the Shang cultures mostly. Now, before we actually get into antiquity, let's go ahead and catch up because the last we saw in ancient China was around 1500 BC. Now, the Shang culture was supposed to be between 1400 and 1100 BC. Now, this would make them more of a Bronze Age, Iron Age culture. However, I did not cover them before, and there's something so interesting on them. They were centered around hemp weaving. They're actually the first ones, I believe, to have found evidence of burnt hemp, and on analysis, they found that they think that they cured them in ponds. So this would have been the first time to actually help strengthen hemp rope by soaking them in ponds or pond water. And beyond that, they found some spinning whorls that they would use for their hemp production. Now, the way that these spindle whorls apparently worked is a spindle was inserted through a center hole and the implement was held in the left hand and spun while fiber was fed onto it with the right hand. The technology was so advanced that several types of whorls were used to make different hempen fabrics. To think that they had such technology for such hemp weavings back then is so interesting. It's crazy to me to think about. And actually, I'll get into this later, but this is why hemp was almost on par in price with silk, just a little bit less, at least in the archaeological documents that we have found. Then we come to the Pintsao again. Now, I did cover the Pintsao in episode 2 of our series. Now, the reason I covered it so early is it's supposed to be a collection of writings from an emperor, Shen Nung, from 2300 BC. However, the reason I'm talking about it now is it's supposed to have been written around 100 BC, the actual book of Pintsao. But there's a quote in this book, the Pintsao, that I wanted to address. Hemp grows along rivers and valleys at the Taishan, but is now common everywhere. Now, the reason I mention this from the Pintsao is this is one of the first historically written documents of cannabis being cultivated. But before we move to the Han Dynasty, I want to mention the Ching. Now, this apparently is the oldest collection of poetry in ancient China, and it dates back to around the 6th or 7th century BC. Now, this is a collection of over 305 songs or poems. And it actually translates to the Book of Songs or the Book of Odes. However, in these 305 songs or poems, it mentions ma or cannabis 7 times. So there were at least some early poets that really enjoyed ma or cannabis. Now here is one quote from one of the poems in the Ching. The pond at the east gate can be used to soak the hemp. Now we're moving to the Han Dynasty, and they ruled from the 3rd century BC to the 3rd century AD. However, in a burial site in Changsha in the Hunan province, they found the burial site of a very well-preserved woman. And not only did they find this well-preserved woman, she apparently had over 1,000 items buried with her. She must have been very influential or very important. However, the most important thing that they found in this burial, at least for our history series, is they found jars full of hemp seed. And hemp seed would have been a very popular food at the time. And then in the first dictionary that is compiled in ancient China, the Shuo-wen Chieh-tzu, which was compiled by Shen in the Han Dynasty. But this dictionary actually gives 4 variations for ma or cannabis. And that says to me that it was a very important word to have so many different variations for it so early on. Now, we also have government documents from the Han Dynasty, which show that cannabis is around, in their currency, $300 to $400, which is also, interestingly, just a little bit less than silk. So hemp was actually almost on par with silk. Now, that's actually really interesting, and it coincides with what we were hearing from the ancient Greeks, that hemp and linen were really hard to tell the difference between, even from professionals. Then we come to Cai Lun. Cai Lun was a eunuch who was in service to the emperor in the Han Dynasty. He is also credited in the histories of the Han Dynasty of actually coming up with hemp paper, or the invention of hemp paper. to replace the fabrics with a much cheaper and readily available source. Now, he's accredited with this in 105 AD. However, we have found multiple evidences of hemp paper dating before 105 AD. So it seems that he actually piggybacked off the idea of others. But he is the one credited with the invention of hemp paper thus far. We have found evidences that date back to around 100 BC, so 200 years before Kai Lung was actually credited with the invention of hemp paper. Now, the story of how he made his hemp paper so popular is actually really interesting and really crazy and really brilliant if you actually think about it. Apparently, they had a ploy where they were going to make everyone think that the hemp paper had magical powers. So they pretended that Kai Lun actually died. Then they buried him. However, apparently he had a bamboo air tube going in the dirt so he could breathe. And then they asked everyone to burn hemp paper over his grave in order to resurrect him. And so once they did this, they actually exhumed him, and then he popped up saying he was alive. And so this apparently made everyone think that there was magical powers in hemp paper. Now that's going to do it for today's episode. However, next week I'm going to be coming back with the Middle Ages. And there's so much in the Middle Ages. This is where cannabis really moves around Europe, and boy, does it get around. And not only does it get around, it actually becomes such a staple for our age of discovery. But I will be covering this in next episode, so I truly hope that you come back and follow along. Now, really quick, I don't know if I'm going to have an episode for next week. I do feel myself coming down with a little bit of a sickness. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice yet, but I can definitely begin to feel it. Whether or not I'm going to be able to get an episode out next week, I am not sure. However, I will be coming back the following week if I do not get one out next week. And I do apologize in advance if I do not. Now, if you enjoyed this video or you learned anything, please leave a like and a comment and let me know what you think. And also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button so you can stay up to date with videos coming out in the future. And now, as always, Jay is going to go smoke a J.